Hello, everyone. We are back with yet another episode of Superannuated Starman. I'm not sure what episode number this is.
It should be 44.
That's what I was thinking because I know that there was a thing with the last episode that we did. We did it again, folks. This is actually episode 45, not 44. We're going to be on track next episode, I promise. But I'm Sean Ryan, and as you hear in the background, I'm joined by Cory Braucks and Chris Duerksen. He's back. So, Cory, Chris, how are you guys doing?
Not too bad. How about you?
It's been very, very busy in my life, and it's been busy all around. And for all of us, it's been a little longer than normal in between episodes. It's the summertime. Our lives have all ramped up significantly, but we're going to shake off some of the cobwebs, and we're going to talk about a little known franchise, Pokemon. Specifically, Pokemon FireRed, LeafGreen for the Game Boy Advance. But before we dive into history, Cory, how are you doing, brother? I haven't heard from you really.
I'm doing pretty good. I'm getting murdered at work, the usual business, but excited to play some video games with you guys.
Chris, how's work treating you?
Also, it's going well. No complaints.
Oh, well, I have tons of complaints. I'm buried under a mountain of schoolwork in between finishing out my last clinicals. I'm doing some more classes for the next degree level, and I'm teaching again. I have a brand new class of students, so I'm swamped all the time.
Sounds amazing.
That sounds awful.
It's a combination of amazing and awful. I'm awful. That all said, let's take a quick music break, and when we come back, we're going to discuss the history of this game. We already discussed the history of the original Pokemon games, Red, Blue, Green, and then we played Yellow for the Game Boy and Game Boy Color, so this history section isn't going to be very intensive. But if you're interested in hearing about the history of those games, head on back to episode 25 and check it out.
Mm,
Cory, you have some thoughts on that?
You say that, but I have words.
Well, I want to hear all those words just momentarily, but I'm going to knock out a little bit of the history, and then I'm going to ask you for some of that. That said, I'm going to briefly go over some of the things that I did mention in that video, or really in that podcast. If you're from anywhere other than Japan, you may remember the original games being red and blue, not red and green. In Japan, Pokemon Red and Green came out in 1996, with Blue coming out later in the same year. 2 years later, however, the rest of the world was introduced to the franchise through Pokemon Red and Blue. Paying homage to the original games, nearly a decade later, on January 29th of 2004, Pokemon FireRed and LeafGreen were released on the Game Boy Advance. The rest of the world would have to wait, as it wouldn't release until later that year on September 7th and October 1st for North America and Europe, respectively. These games were complete remakes using a modified game engine used in Ruby and Sapphire. Although they feature the same characters, plot points, and locations from the original games, there were several quality of life improvements made. Cory, can you talk us through some of those quality of life improvements and differences?
At length. So let me see. I have a lot of stuff here. So Fire Red and Leaf Green, they introduced a host of game changes. There's a large graphic overhaul from Gen 1. So like every sprite was remastered or ported in from Ruby and Sapphire to match the appearance. The game is now in full color rather than like the grayscale of the original series. And you can customize like your chat frames. So you can like change it up from the standard slate gray to like red, green, or blue, or silver and gold, or there's like cool like checker patterns and like pink brick and stuff like that. The map got a huge visual overhaul. And critically, the bag has been changed as well. You'll see that the inventory space has been massively increased as well as sorted into pockets. So, Sean, I remember we were talking about this when we originally played. You don't have to like dig through your bag looking for Pokeballs or key items anymore. And you don't have to worry about like hitting 50 items and not being able to pick stuff up.
Yeah, a lot of that we're going to discuss in our playthrough, but man, these quality of life improvements were just massive, massive game changers over the originals.
And I believe this is the first game as well that actually has sprites for the items as well now. So when you go through your bag, you'll see like in the bottom left corner that it's a little icon of a Pokeball or a potion or things of that nature. So this is the first game that gave us images for the items. What else I got here? The boxes now will change. So when you get to 30 for capturing a Pokemon, it will automatically switch to the new capture box. So you don't have to worry about like missing a legendary Pokemon because your box is full. Um, there are things from Gold and Silver and parts of Red or a Ruby Sapphire that did not make it over. Things such as like the secret bases or growing berries, those did not, and the Pokemon contest as well. None of that made it over. I'm assuming it's like for purity's sake, where this is more or less just a complete overhaul of the original game, so they didn't want to bring in any of that extra stuff. Um, Berries are available though. You can find them in the world map. You can pick them up from like secret spots, or you can find them like digging around in the trash cans in the SSN and stuff like that. And there is a location in the game where there is a berry forest where berries will occasionally appear. I think it's step based. I was not able to confirm that. There's no in-game clock in Fire Red and Leaf Green. So in Gold and Silver and beyond, you guys might not be able to feel familiar about this. Well, Sean, you might because you played the new games. But there's a day-night cycle in the games as the generations went on. So you can find Pokemon at night more frequently sometimes than you can in the day. But there's no day-night cycle in this because it's just a reimagining of the original game. So there's no internal clock in this one. So that's why you can't really like plant berries and grow them. And they just added in a location in the game where they'll reappear, basically.
I can't remember in the original one, like when you dropped off your Pokemon at the babysitter, like the
The
trainer or
daycare
whatever.
guy, yeah.
Yeah, wasn't that?
That is step based, yeah. Yeah, so I think that's what that was my theory, that the berries were also step based. Like you harvest them and then they'll grow more as you take more steps around the game. But I couldn't find anything online to confirm that theory. So I think Gen 1 players will also notice immediately that when you look at moves, you can examine them in detail now. So when you mouse over a move, or when you like hover over it with your, cycling through with the game, you'll be able to see their typing, their accuracy, their power, and they'll also have a little explanation box on the bottom that gives like a little blurb of what's going on with the move. That was all completely missing in the original game. I think we talked about like in the last game when we played Yellow, like when you leveled up, it just told you like, "Hey, do you want to learn Thunder, for example?" And you had no idea if Thunder was any better than Thunderbolt on your Pikachu, and you just kind of had to like gamble, and the whole thing was very trial and error. And so for new players, that was like a real like big issue. I remember you guys talking about like, I have no idea if this is better or like what the difference is. So now in the new games, like you can mouse over those, or I keep saying mouse, but you can hover over those and highlight it. You can basically see like, hey, what does this do? What's the accuracy? What's the power? Like how many power points does it have? So that's a big modification in this one as well. A lot of the moves got rebalanced, like the power points and the accuracy and power were all modified. Other things got tweaked, or like bug fixes were done to like improve the functionality. For example, like leech life. It'll work now if you kill like a substitute Pokemon, and you'll get your hit points back even if you break the substitute. And for example, like if you use a leech ability on something that has the ability, God, what's it called? Liquid Ooze. So there's this, like some Pokemon have something called like Liquid Ooze. I think Tentacool is one of them, maybe Muck. It's not very common, but if you use a leech ability on something with Liquid Ooze, you'll actually take damage instead. So it's like if you use Leech Life or Absorb, Giga Drain, Leech Seed, you'll actually like take damage instead of being healed. So like they changed a lot of moves like that. They added in a lot of functionality, and they changed things around. Like Bite, for example, is now a dark type instead of normal, and it's special instead of physical. There's like the physical special split that happened. They added in the dark pool and they increased the bug pool. So now psychic is not like this massively overpowered thing where I mean, I think I talked about this in the last game where like if you had a Kadabra, you could basically just roll the entire game because there's really nothing to stop you from just taking damage essentially. So now like psychic being like the unmatched type that it was, it's finally been balanced out. And also they changed the way passive damage works. So passive damage would be things like poison, burn, I can't think of anything else off the top of my head. Leech seed, any of those things that would happen. Previously, it occurred at the end of your Pokemon's attack. So if you use tackle, you'd say, "Oh, I tackled someone," and then I would take poison damage. Now everything happens at the end of the round. So when you're fighting, you can tackle, and then your opponent can hit you back, and then the secondary effects take place at the end of the round. So now you're not like dying after you hit somebody until the fight's over, basically. This generation also introduced double battling. So now you can fight two trainers at once. There are a couple of double battles in the overworld as well as in the end game. And then the HM dive was introduced in Ruby Sapphire, and it's not in Fire Red or Leaf Green, but you can trade over to get it. Fire Red Leaf Green also introduces the Sebi Islands. So it's more of their end game content. After you beat the Cinnabar Gym, you'll unlock the first 3 islands. And after you beat the Elite Four and obtain the National Dex, you'll unlock the next 4 islands for a total of 7. Now, there are technically 9 islands, but most of us will never see those as the last 2 are unlocked with mystery gift items. And you need to get the Mystic and Aurora tickets to unlock those islands for like 8 and 9 respectively. And you'll get access to Naval Rock and Birth Island. Those tickets were released during like in-game or not in-game, real-world events like held in Japan, the United States, and Mexico from like 2004 to 2007. So a lot of us will never see those basically. But if you were lucky enough to go to one of those events, you'd get those tickets and you could go and catch Ho-Ho and Lugia, and Deoxys was introduced in this game. So you'd be able to find those on those islands. Lastly, um, the music also received like a big update. I think one of the most notable places where it would be like Lavender Town, where in the original games it was like it was real like dissonant and horrible, and now it's been kind of remastered to sound like much more instrumental. Like every zone was really polished up. They took a lot of they took advantage of like a lot of like the technology advances of the time and made it less like horrible and like MIDI sounding. But the only thing that really didn't get an overhaul was like the horrible like cries of the damned of your Pokemon like coming out of the Pokeball. So there's just a lot that changed in between like gens 2 and 3, and there was a pretty big overhaul in terms of quality of life.
Wow. Thank you so much for all of that, Corey. That is so much and absolutely amazing. In addition to all those in-game changes, those improvements as well, the game released with a wireless adapter, removing the need for the game link cables when trading Pokemon. This was a huge improvement over Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire, which also released on the Game Boy Advance. Now, for transparency, I will say that I never owned these games, but I have watched a couple of videos claiming that the wireless adapter can be used to transfer Pokemon back and forth. But I've also read that you cannot and can only use the link cables. Corey, can you shed any light on that? I don't know if you have any of that information.
Yeah, the Gen 3 games, as far as I know, all function with the wireless adapter. I've seen them in person being traded wirelessly. I've seen videos of them being traded wirelessly. I never had a wireless adapter because it was like a lot of money at the time. Um, I've used a link cable back in the day. I had the cool one where it had the splitter, so you could use it for both the Game Boy Advance and the Game Boy, because there were other games that you could play on the Game Boy Color that you could play like cross-platform basically. But I know that the wireless adapter was mandatory because it was how you retrieve the mystery items at those world events. So the function had to work in these games for it to basically get you those items. So I know that the developers made it so those things function. Um, as far as trading goes, though, as well, this is the generation that the current coding for the Pokemon exists now. So Gen 3 is basically when Game Freak like changed the character encoding, which means that their proprietary like game code that registers the way Pokemon are stored into the save file, they changed that. So in Gen 1 and 2, it was written in a different way. And now from Gen 3 onwards, it's been written in the same way that it is since like 2004. So you can technically trade a Pokemon from Ruby, Sapphire all the way up to the current generation, like Scarlet Violet, if you have the like DS and the 3DS or whatever to trade it all the way up. So that's something really cool. Like anything from like 2004 can be traded to modern day now. And
That's pretty cool. I did not know that.
yeah, it's super dope. Like you can have like a 12-year-old Pokemon, or you could have one of those rare Pokemon from the events that I'm talking about, like Deoxys, and you can trade it up to modern day. And when you go and look in the game file, it'll say like original trainer, like so
God.
and so,
You know what
and
that
from
reminds
like
me of?
yeah, it's wild.
No, you know what current trend that reminds me of?
What's that?
NFTs.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, this is my
Pokemon invented
this
Oh
is
my
my
NFTs.
Pokemon.
god! Oh my god! That is terrible.
Yeah, that's funny. But no, like so back in the day they used a different like code in the game to register something for like a Dragonite, for example. So a Gen 1 Dragonite was written out in a certain way, and then a Gen 3 Dragonite uses like a very different like hexadecimal code. So that's why you can't trade from Gen 1 up without modding your like save files through like a ROM hack or something.
I have a question, and I don't know if you'll be able to answer this, but it goes along those same lines. Does this still count for the Pokemon that were caught and put in like the Pokemon Bank or Pokemon Home from the 3DS eShop Pokemon downloads?
Yeah, so if you uploaded anything into the Pokemon Bank, you can technically still get it back out. Like that's all using the same code that Game Freak wrote.
That is super interesting.
Yep. Like I for example, I had I think it's Black and White were the ones that originally had the Pokemon Bank, or like a version of that. Like Nintendo had several iterations of that content. I don't remember what the names are, but I had Pokemon from Black and White that I transferred over into I think Sword and Shield using that ability. So
Just amazing stuff and such foresight to plan all that out. And maybe they didn't have the foresight for it. Maybe they were just winging it and just lucked out for how things worked out in the end.
I mean, there certainly was a conscious decision, right? Because 1 and 2 they just had this like script that they use where they're like, okay, like here's the combination of ones and zeros that it lists, your Magikarp or whatever. And then Gen 3, they said, okay, no, we're going to set it up where it's like this weird, like 0FF hexadecimal system. And that's the way we're going to track all of these Pokemon. And there's a different variance between um, there's a variance between like even the English and European and Japanese versions. It's a slight iteration on those codes, so you can actually see stuff that's region locked as well. So like they really put a lot of thought and effort into that. I don't know if they were planning on that being like a 20-year carryover, but they certainly sat down and said, how can we make sure that these can be read from any system, and we can what's the word I'm looking for? We can track like where they've been and who's had them and where they're from originally.
That's just absolutely fascinating stuff. And to ensure this segment isn't an hour and a half long, I'm going to talk about some sales data and then I'm going to wrap this segment up. Surprisingly, the Japanese first production run was limited to 500,000 copies, though it's unknown if it was because of being unable to produce enough wireless adapters or because they simply expected to sell less of the game because it was a remake of the original games. In reality, it did sell less in its first week than Ruby and Sapphire did in the same time period. But to no one's surprise, when pre orders opened up in America, the game received over 150,000 pre orders, twice the numbers of Ruby and Sapphire. Selling over 1 million copies in less than a month, FireRed and LeafGreen would go on to sell over 12 million copies, making it the second best selling game. And I say game because their numbers are combined here, only to be outsold to Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire, which sold over 16 million. And if you're wondering what the third best selling title on the Game Boy Advance was, well, it was another Pokemon game, Pokemon Emerald. So yeah, Pokemon taking up all three top spots for that little handheld. Guys, I think we can wrap it up here for the history segment and move on to our history with Pokemon. What do you guys think?
Give me some more of that sweet, sweet music, Sean.
So my big question about this one is, how long ago did we play Yellow for an episode?
Well, it's been close to a year now, isn't it?
Has it been a year?
Yeah, I think it's been a year.
Oh wow. Because yeah, when I started playing this one, I was like, why did we pick the same game in the same year? Like, I know it's a remake and everything, and it's beautiful, and it's remastered, and it sounds better, and it plays better, and it has all the life improvements, but it's not the same game, but it is the same game.
I mean, it for intents and purposes of story beats, it is literally the same game.
Yes, and you guys will have to forgive me. I'm not a giant Pokemon player, so I did not get sucked into this one just because of the fact that it wasn't that long ago. Like, to me, like in my world, it wasn't that long ago when we beat Yellow, so I didn't get too terribly sucked into this game. I mean, I did take the time to appreciate the upgrades and the graphics, and it looks better, and it's prettier and better music and less obnoxious and much easier to navigate and everything, like the menus and stuff like that. And yes, I noticed that some of the, like you said, some of the move changes and stuff like that. But to me, it was the same game. But I did like Yellow. But so besides Pokemon Go, Yellow was the first Pokemon game I ever played, and then this was the second Pokemon game I ever played. So I don't know. You can consider me lame in the Pokemon realm.
To answer your question, Chris, I uploaded the episode on March 14th of last year. So we were playing before that. So it's
Oh wow.
it's been quite a while, actually.
Yeah.
Is that 15 months?
Yeah, around the time frame. Well, we did take a while to complete this, especially me. And just kind of jumping in on it, when I played Yellow, it was brutal because I had only played one Pokemon game before that, and that was the remakes of was it Pearl and
Yeah, it
Shining
was,
Pearl and
Shining Pearl and whatever Diamond.
Brilliant Diamond, that's what it is. So those are the only full-fledged Pokemon games I played up to that point, and so I was going way, way back to the beginning, and it was so rough. And I probably talked about this at length in that episode 25, where I wasn't having a lot of fun because it was just there was so many quality of life improvements that I had already become accustomed to playing such a modern game that going back it was just awful. It was good to kind of get a sense of where everything started, but if you've ever played those initial games, it was if you ever played the current games, it was so hard going back. But I do remember having fun playing Pokemon Yellow. And I'm contradicting myself here because I said I wasn't having fun. I wasn't having fun with things like guessing about what moves did what or how strong they were. And you touched on that, Corey. And that was just miserable. But my opinion has definitely changed on this series, as I will talk about in my current playthrough. But because I don't have a history outside of playing Yellow, just like Chris, Corey, you're the only one that has an actual childhood history here to discuss what it was like playing back in the day 20 years ago.
Yeah, so the reason we're doing Fire Red and Leaf Green right now is because when we played Yellow, I recognized there were some conscious gripes about it. Number one, you guys didn't get to choose your starter in Yellow. Everyone got stuck with Pikachu. I remember that was a big selling point. Number two was basically the quality of life things we're talking about, where the bag was a nightmare to deal with, and Sean spent almost the entire game without a bicycle, for
I
example,
forgot about that.
and just the fact that like you couldn't tell what any of the moves are or anything like that. So I wanted to basically play this and kind of do a compare and contrast and let these guys play the original game as it was meant to be played, but with the like quality and color and just visual upgrades of everything that makes this a nice game and makes it kind of a big sale for the franchise.
Not to go on what you just said there, play the game the way it was meant to be played, but with all the upgrades. I think this game was the game that it was the way it was meant to be played, but they just didn't have the means to do it when they first released Yellow.
Well, Chris,
Right.
let's talk about that in our
Fair enough.
current
Yeah.
modern playthrough. Yep.
So, as far as history goes, I had a Game Boy Advance SP. I'm very cool. I had one of those because I asked for it for my birthday, and I got a copy of Fire Red because my original game was Pokemon Red. So I got this. I can't remember how old I was, but this was like one of the first things I bought for that system. I was super hyped to play it. And it honestly is like we're talking about the way Pokemon was meant to be played. And this is just a great reimagining of the title. And I had a lot of fun playing it. And this is one of the as the generations go on, they give you more end game content. And I remember being super excited that after beating the gym leaders and the Elite Four, you had something to do. Because in the original game, you kind of just beat the game and then that's all, and like credits roll, and then you get to just kind of wander around and there's nothing to do. Um, this game introduces the Sevi Islands, so you get to go to a new zone afterwards, and you get to like hunt for some legendaries, and you get to fight in a bunch of trainer tower battles, and like kind of complete your decks and everything. And to me, that was one of the coolest selling points about this when you got the reimagining was that okay, here's this whole big thing at the end where now you can go catch stuff and you can work on completing your decks, and as well as that you can go and get other Pokemon that aren't in Ruby Sapphire, and you can trade them over to your Ruby Sapphire game as well. So, a lot of people my age, we started with the original 150, and I think a lot of those Pokemon, kind of hold like a special place in your heart as far as nostalgia goes. And even when you play the newest games, it's like, no, man, like I still want a Kadabra. Like, I want my Alakazam. Like, I don't want any of these new Pokemon. Like, I'm very stubborn and I want to play with all the cool old ones that I love. And like, you make some new favorites and you see new things and you try out new stuff. But like, I always kind of drift back to like, man, like how fun would this be if I could like get an Alakazam and have the new moves that they give you in this game on my old Pokemon. And you kind of just start thinking about stuff like that. And like that was one of the cool things about this one is like there are like 150 new moves and there are a bunch of modifications and they did upgrade a bunch of stuff. Like I played this I'm trying not to get too much into it. But like I played this new one today with Beedrill, and like Beedrill gets like Twin Needle, which wasn't in the original game. So it's like you get these new moves which make old Pokemon viable again. And it was just this cool thing where they updated everything and they added in new stuff. And it's like, oh yeah, this is super fun. Like we get to try out things that used to suck and now like they're better and they're useful. And every Pokemon kind of fills this niche slot and it adds a lot more variety and replayability, and that's one of the things that made this title like even though it was only 6 years or whatever between releases, like it still did a whole bunch to make it like viable and vibrant and refreshed, and like it was a really cool thing to see like my childhood like given to me in a shiny new package that made it like super good and fun still.
I got a couple questions for you, Corey.
Yes.
Your Game Boy SP, did you choose that over the original Game Boy Advance? And nowadays, looking at it, would you have rather had the SP or the original, form factor wise?
I chose the SP over the original. Um, One of the reasons why I did that, did the original Advance didn't have the backlight on it, did it?
Correct, no backlight.
Yeah, so I think the SP might have had the backlight. And I think I don't know if I'm remembering this correctly or not, but I just like the way the SP looked. It looked more like a Game Boy in my opinion, because the original Game Boy was this like weird, crappy rectangle, and the SP was this like cube, and it opened up, and you got this like cool foldable rectangle shape still, and it fit nicely in your hands, and it wasn't too wide, and it was just this. I don't know. I liked it. It was kind of like the Motorola flip phone era, so it was just fun to have things that could open up, and I just really like the look of the SP, and I would still get the SP over the Advance any day. I just think it's a neat little console.
Form factor, I prefer the original, but the SP does have that built in backlight. I just tested it out, but I have my original one here. I have an original Game Boy Advance, and then I have a modded one, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later. But my second question was about Kyle, your brother that we've had on the show a couple times. Was he still into Pokemon at this time in his life, or
No, he's not cool.
okay, he had kind of gotten out of it by then? So,
Yeah, he's like, I don't know, senior high school or whatever he was by this point.
so did you have a group of friends that you were still trading Pokemon with because you were
Yeah,
playing
I did.
with your brother initially?
Yeah, I had a lot of friends. I hung out with a lot of
Brag.
the yeah, I had a lot of friends. No, I had friends that would play this. I hung out like with a lot of Asian kids in high school and middle school, and a lot of them were super into this kind of stuff, like Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh cards and stuff like that. So we definitely like traded around a lot of that sort of stuff, and it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I'm right there with you, Chris. Having a lot of friends, that's a humble brag if I've ever heard one.
Don't worry, that fell off pretty quickly.
As it tends to, as it tends to. But it's so awesome to hear you talk about your memories of the original game and now this game coming out years later, a remake of the original. And I cannot wait to hear about your kind of comparison to not only what it was like playing it 20 years ago, but also what it was like playing it today compared to the original games. But unless you guys have anything else, I think we can move on to our next segment where we talk about what it was like to replay Fire Red and Leaf Green today.
Well, I did want to mention one thing that's really cool about Nintendo in general, at least back in this time frame. Um, I eventually got a Nintendo DS Lite, and it was the cool Zelda one with the Triforce on it. Um, and one of the nice things that Nintendo did was that they put the slot in the back where you could put an SP cartridge still. So even like years later, you could still plug this game in and play it still, which that backwards compatibility that Nintendo offered even went so far as to putting this into a DS Lite and then using the wireless capability on the DS Lite to then trade Pokemon off of it.
Got one more question for you. Talking about it just kind of triggered in my mind. Did you get a chance to go to any of those giveaways or get any of those exclusive
Oh,
Pokemon?
dude, it would have been so cool. They held them like at places I would never end up getting to go to as like a middle schooler or teenager. Like one of them was like the electronic game show in like Mexico City, and then the other one was like, I think like E3 or something like in California. So like I grew up in Minnesota. Like none of it was anywhere near where I was hanging out.
Well, that's unfortunate because that would have made for some great storytelling. But I think with all that, we're ready to move on, guys.
Yes.
All right, stick around and enjoy this music. And when we come back, we're going to talk about what it was like to replay today.
All right, so I guess I'm starting this off with modern, and as I mentioned before, I'm not a huge Pokemon player, so I didn't get too sucked in, but I rented this from Blockbuster and got into it and noticed all the upgrades immediately over Yellow, and it did play much nicer, like I mentioned before, and the music was great, and I chose Charmander was my starter. What about you guys?
Oh,
Interesting.
Charmander all the way. That was my big complaint in Yellow because I wanted to be Charmander.
Okay, well, everybody says Charmander is the most overrated starter.
He is.
Who would you go with?
Best
I picked the lawnmower.
best starter.
I thought about going with Venusaur.
Yeah, I went with Venusaur because that's what I picked as a child
Wait, wait,
as
wait.
well.
It's Bulbasaur, right? And
Oh yeah,
Well,
yeah.
then
yes, but
Venusaur.
I mean,
Okay,
it,
okay.
it turns into Venusaur.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not trying to fact check
Yeah,
anybody here. I was
no,
confused.
no, it's fine.
What'd you guys?
Yeah, I picked Bulbasaur and I named him Lawnmower.
Okay, well, what'd you guys name your characters?
I hit the start button on accident, so it was whatever stupid name that the game gave you. I think it's Jack is what the name is for.
I named my character in Yellow Ash, and this time I think I named him Red.
Oh, I named my rival Butts.
I went with head and face, so I was just giggling at the names.
We're grown adults.
So, so Chris, like, how far did you get into it? Because I know
No,
you had mentioned
not-
earlier that you didn't get all
Yeah,
the way
not-
through the game.
Not too far. I just made it to made it past the first gym and to oh god, what was I can't remember what's the name of the second town that you get to?
Cerulean City.
Yeah. Yeah, that and that's where I
So
stopped.
I have a question though. So you took Charmander.
Mhm.
What did you use for Brock?
I found primates.
Okay, so you just got a man key and leveled it
Yep.
up to karate chop.
That's I swear I did the exact same thing in yellow.
You
Except,
probably
It
did.
except
is.
in yellow, it wasn't in yellow weren't primates or mankeys a lot rare,
Yeah, they
and then
were.
and this
I
one they
ended up
turned them
getting
up.
a. Yeah, it's a guaranteed when you go to the side now.
Yeah.
I
Oh, okay.
think.
Okay. Because yeah, as soon as I found one, I was like, okay, gonna win. Just gonna do
Yeah,
the
because
exact same thing.
I got a Nidorino in the original run, and I got him double kick. That's how I got through with yellow. But this time I just had Bulbasaur, and I just got Vine Whip at 10, and I beat the bejesus out of him.
Yeah, I did the same thing where I remember Corey telling me just go to the side on the left or to the west.
Yep, beat the rival
And
fight, and then just get yourself a
yep,
Mankey.
exactly. And then I just grinded it out until I had all my Pokemon up to a decent enough level that I could steamroll through them. But that said, I did have a little bit of problems with Misty, but not too terribly so.
Yeah, that's the wild thing about taking Charmander as the starter is that the first several gyms are a nightmare, but then when you get to the end and you're fighting like Koga and stuff, it's like, oh, fire just completely destroys Poison Bug. Okay, cool.
Yeah. See, and I didn't play far enough in to have that problem, but yeah, I'll admit, as soon as I caught the Mankey, I just started leveling that guy up and then kind of forgot about Charmander. like he was in there, but like I immediately like just started going for something else, you know?
Yeah, you're like, I just need this guy to beat him. Sorry.
Exactly. Yep.
Was there anything else that you found to be exceptionally better than the iterations that we played previously, Chris?
Oh yeah, like I said, the I mean, like the graphics were way better. The I was a big fan of the inventory being way better. Um, the quality of life improvements were absolutely huge.
Do you mean to tell me that you didn't like scrolling through 57 items to find your bicycle?
I never got a bicycle in this one, so I didn't have to worry about it.
You know what I mean,
Yes, but
though?
I wasn't looking forward to that. And when I saw that I fixed it, I was like, oh, good. Like and like I said, like I did feel like this was the version that they meant for the game to be when they first came out with the game. You know what I mean? Like had they been able to do all this stuff on a Game Boy when they first made the game, I'm sure they would have. Because who wants to make a clunky, awful, or not awful, but I mean, who wants to make a clunky, well, yeah, awful inventory system and menu system and stuff like that? Like they were just stuck with the tools that they had. So this version of it definitely fixed all those issues.
Speaking of that bike, so you guys alluded to it initially. In the first game, I spent over 30 hours on that playthrough. This time around, much, much, much faster because I knew exactly how to get that bike and what to do. So that ate away so much of the time. But replaying this game, you know what? I need to back up. I want to talk about how I replayed it. So I decided to play this on my modded Game Boy Advance. I alluded to this a little bit ago, and it looks so good on a backlit screen. And I prefer the form of the original Game Boy. And that's what I was using. And if you're in Central Texas and you're interested in any handheld console mods, the person I went through, her name is Cass. She is the what's the word? The founder of Button Masher Mods, and she does amazing work. And I recommend her any day of the week. She's not sponsoring any of this. It's just my personal feelings on the matter. She did an outstanding job. But on to the replay. It was it was fantastic. It was amazing from top to bottom, seeing how clean and nice everything looked, seeing everything in full color instead of just the palette variations like you kind of talked about.
Grayscale.
Yeah, exactly. And it just everything was just so improved and just fleshed out. And like Chris said, it looks like the game I think they wanted to make back in the day that they couldn't make due to the restraints of time and technology.
Paired between the two games, like I did get the feeling like they didn't put this re-release out because, oh, let's just cash in on something that we know will sell and will be an easy remake and not have to put any thought into it. You can tell they put a lot of thought into this, and they fixed a lot of bugs, and they fixed a lot of just clunkiness and awkwardness, and like it definitely felt like they put a lot of thought and care into this remaster, and it was not just a easy sell. You know what I mean?
Speaking of some things that they changed, Corey, you'll have to spot check me here. They did not add in Mew for this game, correct?
I don't believe so. No.
Yeah, because that was something I had thought about initially. I was like, will I still be able to go through and perform the bug or the glitch in order to get Mew? And I was going to look it up, but I was like, you know what, Sean, just plow through this game. Oh, another thing, Professor Oak, man, we talked about this before, but he is such a to Gary. And I think he's even
I
worse.
remember we talked about this. I think the reason why Gary Oak is such a horrible person is because he's just been constantly striving to get the approval of his grandfather, who treats the neighbor boys so much better than him. And like as soon as Gary becomes like the Elite Four champion, you beat him, and then Oak is like, "Well, I came here to see Gary, but it turns out Gary still sucks."
I feel so bad for him, man, because his grandfather is such an he's just such an ass. He's not a good guy.
Now, that was one thing I was looking for. I'm like, okay, did they make Gary a little less obnoxious in this game? And from what I
No, Gary's
saw,
still a horrible person.
yep, right out of the gate, he's like, didn't he say something along the lines like, yeah,
I'll smell you later, Ash.
my mom's got a map, but I'm going to tell her not to give it to you. So
It's your sister.
oh, okay, yeah, my sister, but still, I thought that was still funny. So they still made him a little ahead.
Yeah, but it wasn't fair. He's only like that
Yes,
because
yes. He's a
Professor
victim
Oak,
too.
yeah.
Yes.
He's a victim. That's the perfect way to say it. Corey, we don't have a lot to say. We need you to guide us here. Let's hear about what it was like for you replaying today. Maybe we can riff off of that because I'm grasping here, just trying to pull things out.
Well, one of my questions is, Sean, did you go poke around the Sevi Islands?
No, sir. I got to the end, I saw the credits, and I was like, all right, I'm good to go. Because I had so much other stuff going on. I didn't want to disappoint you
Okay.
and not finish the game.
All right, that's fair. So one of the things that I really liked about this is, I talked about it in the childhood playthrough, but the Sevi Islands are really cool. Um, you get down there, and they have a bunch of extra content, and you can unlock a bunch of cool stuff.
I did look into this a little bit, and like you said, like this is basically the end game, right?
Right. It's like it's like the post game, like you beat the campaign, like credits,
Mm-hmm.
zone basically.
But this is
And like you take like a ferry to go down there, and then you can like fish and find like Pokemon that you wouldn't normally be able to find, and you can like run around, and there's a bunch of like trainer battles you can do, and like there's extra vendors and stuff, and you can buy like I think you can buy like full restores and all that sort of stuff you wouldn't normally be able to find.
Just had a question pop up in my head, and this is really more for your childhood memories. But back in the day, did you ever trade with any of the newer games, the Ruby Sapphire, and go back and play the Blue Red, or excuse me, Fire Red and Leaf Green? And if so, was it easier to beat the game?
What do you mean? Like, did I trade stuff from like Emerald to like beat Leaf Green? You mean?
Yeah, were you able to get any Pokemon that shouldn't be in Fire Red, Leaf Green that you can then use?
So, fun fact, you actually I don't think you can trade with Emerald until you beat Cinnabar.
Okay, yeah, so they had
oh,
an
So
idea
you
built in so that you can't just
yeah, so
steamroll.
you have to unlock the Sevi Islands before you can trade with Ruby and Sapphire.
That makes a lot of sense and is understandable from the developer standpoint.
But yeah, it's just I think it's just a lot of fun. Like there's just the extra content that they give. Like I said, there's the berry forest that you can unlock, so you can go there and you can farm berries every day. And then Mount Ember is there, so you can go up Mount Ember and like you can catch like magmars and all these other cool like fire types and stuff like that. And everything is like way higher levels. You have stuff that you can fight while you're there. I think this is honestly like one of the better titles in the original run of games. I think probably my favorite is still like Heart Gold Soul Silver because you get like 16 gems, but like this is probably like a close second.
I gotta go and play those games sometime, and maybe in a year or so we can put those games on the docket.
We can go up to a next one. Yeah. So I what team did you end up using, Sean? I always like to hear about those.
So I can't remember exactly who I had, but for the most part, I basically took who I got in the beginning and just ran with them almost the entire time. So
All
I
right.
had my Charizard, I had my Primeape, I had my you mentioned him earlier, it starts with an N.
Nidorino.
Yes, yes.
Did you
I
make him a
got him all the way up
Nidoking?
there. Oh, I sure did. And yeah, I basically just took these guys and I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna grind out any gym that I have to beat them, and then I'm gonna move on to the next one. And I'm not going to screw around because I was going for time. I was trying
Right.
to
Yeah, and
get through this as fast
I
as
think that's one
possible.
of the things that slowed you guys down originally. I remember Chris especially was like, I caught a whole new team for every gym.
That bad, but actually, yeah, no, I kind of was, wasn't I?
Yeah, we were like, "What are you doing?" You're like, "I'm on Surge," and I'm like, "What are you doing? Like screwing around over there?" And you're like, "No, man, I'm just leveling this Diglett and all these other guys I caught." I'm just like, "Why?"
So I'm one of those weird types where, like, if I'm gonna catch something and it's usable, I want it to be maxed out.
So not only do you have to catch them all, but you have to level them all. Is that what you're telling me?
Not all. Like I said, like I'm gonna make a team for a gym, and I want that team to be awesome. So and I want them to be even. Like I can't have them being more than 2 or 3 levels apart from each other. Like if I have one Pokemon that's like 10 levels below another one, I'm just gonna focus on that one that's below until it catches up with the rest of the
Dude,
team.
that's wild.
Why? How is that? That's the way to do it. That's the best way to do it. There's no there's no logic for it, but it's just the best way. You have to do it that way. Otherwise, the voices in your head won't shut up.
Okay, then.
Speaking of the voices in my head, where's Sean?
I don't know. Where is Sean?
All right, folks. So I'm going to have a lot of this cut out, but I had some technical difficulties for some time. So if it sounds a little disjointed here, it means that I have finally gotten things back together and we're trying to remember where we left off.
Sean was assaulted by a vicious beast.
Yeah, so my cat decided to head boop the mic, and what I did not know was that you can just touch it and turn it off or mute it. Now I know, and I'll never let that happen again. But all that said, Chris, Corey, did you guys have anything else you wanted to talk about with the replaying of this game or the modern playthrough of Fire Red Leaf Green?
I used Kadabra and Venusaur and Pidgeot and Beedrill and Wigglytuff and Nidoqueen, which is a weird fucking team. Oh, I'm sorry, effing flinging binging team.
It's all good.
Hey, can you say Pidgeot one more time?
Yeah, Pidgeot.
It just sounds so insulting the way you say
You're a Pidgeot.
it. You Pidgeot.
Well, guys, I think that tells us that we don't have anything else for this segment. So let's go
No.
ahead and take another music break. And when we come back, we're going to give our final thoughts on the game, our next game, and then we're going to close out this show. Welcome back, everybody. I hope you enjoyed that music. We are going to discuss our final thoughts of this game in a segment where we take a minute to really kind of think about what this game means to us overall. Is it something that we're going to keep playing? Is it something we're going to let go? Chris, what are your thoughts on this?
Like I said, I'm not a huge Pokemon player, so I probably won't be revisiting this, but I can see why people would. My views on Pokemon, it could be complete, like on the series as a whole, could be completely wrong, but it sounds like each game has its own reasons to play them, and like this game isn't bad by any means, and I'm sure it adds to the series. And like Corey said, like you can trade Pokemon up from this game all the way up to modern versions. So I mean, it definitely, even though it's what 2004, is this one?
Yeah.
It's so, and it's still a relevant game. So yeah, I guess there's no reason not to play it if you're really into it.
Corey, you might have mentioned this in the last episode that we did covering Yellow, but I would say, I just kind of skipping to the end, my thoughts on this game. If you have the desire to go back and play the original games, this is the one to do. Skip the Game Boy games and just go with this because it is infinitely better in every way. There's really no downside to it that I can think of that you would want to play those original Game Boy games. The sounds are better, the colors are better, the movesets are better, it's better balanced. There's so much more to do. You have the connectivity with other games. Like Corey said, you can trade up all these Pokemon in modern day. There's really nothing that you would want to go back and play those original ones for other than some type of historical value.
Or if you're a weirdo trying to set world records.
100%, yeah.
Well,
One or the
yeah.
other.
I get that because there's plenty of games that I still play where I just play them ad nauseum because I'm just addicted to them. So I can see that. But if you are coming into the franchise and you're like, oh, I want to go back and kind of see where things came from, I would skip the Game Boy games and just go straight to this because
100%.
it is so good. And I wish that we had actually started with this and maybe dabbled back into Yellow because it was rough playing those initial games, but I really enjoyed my
bicycle.
time. Oh my god, the bicycle! Yeah, I can't even.
I'm glad I played Yellow, and I'm glad I got to see this compared to Yellow.
And that, one of the funny things is that when you beat Brock in this version, you get running shoes. So like they just force a pair of shoes on you that make you go faster when you hold
Yeah,
down the B
it
button.
reminded it reminded me of Link to the Past one. As soon as you get the running shoes, the game gets so much better.
Yeah, so it's like they make so many quality of life improvements, and as you were saying, Sean, I did mention this at the closing of the Yellow episode because Chris was talking about like getting his kid into playing Pokemon, and I said if you were going to play the original game and you wanted to show it in the original way it's meant to be played, you would start with Fire Red and Leaf Green because Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee are once again the first games remastered, but Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee are also designed with the new engine and they're like completely 3D and they're like made to be played in the modern era, whereas this one still has like the charming like old school sprite format that the original games had. So this is basically, I think, the original version of Pokemon the way Game Freak had intended it to be shown.
And like you said, there's definitely something charming about those 2D sprites that you just can't replicate with 3D models. And I know that might sound snobby, but that's how I feel. And
Well,
that's just from
it's a
growing up.
conscious art decision, right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, there's still games being made today that use, sprites. I think Stardew Valley is a great example of that. It's a massively selling title. It's made by one dude who made it all with sprites, and it's a charming, entertaining, just relaxing title. And it's not that the art direction has anything on the bearing of the game. It's just the way I think it was meant to be shown, and it's just a lovely way to do it.
This is off topic, but talking about charming 2D sprites games, Shovel Knight is now 10 years old.
Jesus.
If you aren't feeling old yet, you probably are now. Corey, do you have anything else you want to add to your final thoughts? We kind of dabbled in what we thought, but do you have
Yeah,
anything else you want to say?
I jumped in a bit, but I really wanted you guys to play this, and I wanted to show off like this is kind of peak childhood Pokemon. It's the original game, it's the original 150. It's the expanded move pool and everything's way better balanced and everything, and you still get like the starters and it's a lot of fun. But I really love this title. It's like kind of a core childhood memory, and I think it was just a lot of thought was put into it. And as Chris said, Nintendo and Game Freak in particular, every new game they try new things and then they sort of keep the best of those previous titles. So in this version you get the berries, which become like a series long trend from here on out. And they didn't keep the day night cycle for this one, but they still bring that back later, and they screw around with the evolutions and they add in like third stage evolutions. So in this version you can get Crobat and you can get, I think, Kingdra's in this one as well, or that might have been next one. But still they keep improving and they keep kind of cherry picking their ideas and they keep making things better. And so this version was sort of the embodiment of 6 years of work and making that original game into like their idealized version of that title. And it's just a lot of fun and I just really enjoy it. And I know this in particular does have a lot of staying power because it's been modded. People do Nuzlocks of it. There is a version of it called Ironmon that a lot of Twitch people play. Like I Ate Your Pie designed it, where basically like they change the levels and everything. So it just becomes like a nightmare of a playthrough, and it's one of those things where it's just a very well loved title, and a lot of people enjoy playing it, and I think it's got a pretty big home in people's hearts, and it's just a good game.
You are saying it so much better than I ever could, and I wish that I had played this a little more recently, and I wish that I had maybe thought a lot more about what this game really meant as a whole to the gaming community and the Pokemon community, because it is, as you said, a special game. But guys, I think that's gonna wrap everything up. Kind of moving forward, our next game is gonna be Journey to Silius. That's an NES original. We are talking about the OG Nintendo Entertainment System game. And other than that, Guys, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day. I know all of our lives are incredibly busy and they just seem to get busier, but thank you so, so much. Chris, Corey, both of you, thank you so, so much.
Pleasure to be here as always.
It's great to be back and good to see you guys.
All right, we will see you next time. Until then, we've been Superannuated Starman.